The memories of this last trip to New York City, I believe, will forever be burned into my brain. The last large gathering I attended prior to COVID-19 was actually at previous Standard H podcast guest Matt Horanic's magazine release party at Bergdorf Goodman. A couple of days prior, I sat down for the following interview, one which took place north of New York City, in a town on the Hudson River that I'd never been to before, which included a subway ride to a train transfer where, quite frankly, I had to ask help from a police officer in order to board the correct departing train. It all worked out, including recording until the absolute last minute when today's guest put on a display of driving back to the train station normally reserved for a track. Thankfully, I ended up making it back for my dinner reservation at the recently opened Torian Yakitori restaurant, which was absolutely delicious and hospitable in only a way the Japanese know how. Perhaps I digress. Today's guest is Bradley Price, who has incidentally always been into cars. As the owner-operator of the watch brand Autodromo, he's found what I believe to be the only legitimate automotive-inspired line of timepieces. I'd not met Bradley prior to our conversation, and it ticked all the boxes and then some. He couldn't have been more gracious with his time, and I thoroughly enjoyed hearing his story. We actually discussed a wide range of topics from Michael Jordan to Ivy League educations, and of course some car talk involving BMW 2002s and the complete backstory of his very cool Ferrari 208 Dino GT4. We discussed purpose-built design as well as the proliferation of micro brands within the watch industry, a world Bradley describes analogous to trees competing for light. It's a really open and honest dialogue that I think you watch nuts will enjoy. Bradley offers a very forthright glimpse into how he began Autodromo and a detailed description of how he began collaborating with the likes of Ford Motor Company. Anyway, not to spoil the whole thing, so let's get to it. I'm your host, Wesley Smith, and you're listening to the Standard H Podcast. Well, Mr. Bradley Price, Autodromo himself.
Present.
Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming up here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really cool space. It's like a warehouse.
Yeah.
But not.
Well, the building was originally built in 1925, and it was oh, there goes the train. It's right on the train tracks.
Yeah.
It was a Bible printing factory, which is why it has this kind of 20s factory building look, like an Albert Kahn building that you might see in Detroit.
Sure.
But with these little Gothic details, because I guess that was their little ecclesiastical touch to indicate that it was a Bible printing place. But it's like a very cool, 1920s factory building.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Now, are you from this area?
No, I'm from Chicago area originally.
What part of Chicago?
From Evanston.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what teams are you loyal to? Baseball, of course, is
well,
what I'm referring to.
I'm not really a sports fan, but I do like the Cubs very much. I mean, and I was lucky because I grew up during the kind of during the whole Michael Jordan Bulls era.
Yeah.
That was like my early teen years.
Yep.
So that was it was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
It felt like you were, because Chicago, obviously it is a big city. It's it's the third largest city, but I feel like when you were a kid growing up in Chicago and the Bulls were winning every year and like Michael Jordan was in every commercial, it really felt like you were living in like the center of the universe.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah.
Well, I grew up in North Carolina, so I actually remember him playing at Carolina
really?
his last year there.
Cool.
And Jordans were the footwear of choice throughout my childhood.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
For
So
sure.
I totally understand.
Yeah.
Those Bulls-Lakers series were, just the pinnacle, frankly.
Yeah, I agree.
Very cool. So then take me through a little bit of your schooling and like where you ended up at college.
So I attended University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I spent 5 years there, and I did 2 different bachelor degrees. So I have a history of art background and an industrial design degree.
Oh, very cool.
And I feel like I actually use both things a lot, because the history of art, you really learn how to write and how to think about things critically. And then the industrial design degree, obviously is the profession that I pursued. So, but I learned a lot more, frankly, in the field than I did at school in terms of design stuff. Like, I think you just learn so much more in an actual office environment than you do in design school.
Learn by doing kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So what were you into as a kid? Were you into cars and watches and stuff then?
I was really into cars.
Okay. What's your most vivid
I've
memory?
always been into cars. My grandmother used to say I was born with a car in my hand because I would always be carrying around a Matchbox car.
Sure.
When I was like a tiny tot.
Yeah.
And it's always been the central passion in my life, and I don't know why, because it's so old. Like it's so early in my stage of life that I can't say where it began or what happened.
Was your dad a car guy? Or
yeah, he is a car guy. But my brother is no interest in cars, so who knows what happens. But my dad had an old Austin Healey when I was a little kid, so I would say that the Austin Healey probably was the origin of it, but you never really know where these things come out of.
Right, yeah.
But I was obsessed with that car, and I loved riding in it, and I loved being around it, and I loved being in the garage in general, and the smell of the garage, and like kind of the gasoline and grass clippings smell of being in the garage.
Right.
Those are very strong childhood memories for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, what did your dad do for a living?
He was a market research consultant.
Okay.
So he was doing surveys and other market research about mainly the marine industry, actually. So he was doing things related to pleasure boating.
Okay.
And worked for various clients in that industry.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Was Lake Michigan obviously a part of that?
Not really, because actually mostly the clients were Japanese companies.
Oh, okay.
They wanted to understand the U.S. market, and so he was conducting research to help them understand what American pleasure boat consumers were interested in, which is really funny too, because we didn't own a boat. We're not boating people at all in the family, but he had a scientific approach to it, so it doesn't really matter whether he was personally interested in boating. I mean, he did a lot of work in that area.
Sure. So what was the motivation to go to Ann Arbor, or is it just not Chicago?
No, well, it was like I didn't get into the Ivies, so that was one thing, but that's fine, whatever. Now that I'm an adult, I'm like, who gives a rat's ass about that? Right. But it seemed like a big deal at the time when you're in high school and you're trying to my brother was a very, very, very academically strong student. So it was like a real hard act to follow because he was like the valedictorian of his class, and he was really just brilliant, and all the teachers remembered him. And then when I came along, it was like, oh, you're... so that was why there was a high bar. There was a very high bar. So
where did he go? Just curious.
He went to Harvard.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing
he was on the Harvard Law Review.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's funny because now as an adult, I look at the Ivies as nothing more than just like a dynamite way to network because...
Well, that's what I was saying to a friend recently. I think that, okay, I haven't sat and audited their classes, but I think that at the end of the day, the benefit of having an Ivy League education is having the Ivy League
alumni.
The contacts,
Yeah.
The classmates you had, the people you lived on your hall, whatever. That's the value that you get out of it more than what... I mean, you could take all the courses online and not achieve anything because you're not getting the organic... interpersonal relationships that you get from living on that campus.
Yeah.
So I think there's kind of a bit of a bill of goods that it's somehow just like, the classes by themselves are what's the from a monetary point of view, like you're paying for this amazing curriculum. And I don't know, I don't think that it can be that much better than other places.
So obviously growing up in North Carolina, we have Duke, Carolina, NC State, Wake Forest, all within 2 hours of one another. And I remember just being from Raleigh, a lot of people would argue that Duke was harder to get in than Carolina, but Carolina was harder to stay in because the classes and the curriculum were harder. Now, I attended neither one of those.
Okay.
So I can't really speak to it, and that's not to throw shade at Duke or anything. But I wonder if, the Ivy Leagues or maybe you should ask your brother. How easy was college when he got there?
Well, he worked very hard. I know he worked really, really hard, and it wasn't easy. And I'm not saying it's easy.
Right.
What I'm saying is that, like, a high-level state school that has good program in that particular area, like the University of Michigan History of Art department at the time was highly reputed, and we had actually most of our faculty were from Harvard and from a few other Ivies. And so I never felt like we were getting a second-rate curriculum from those people. But at the same time, my roommate wasn't Mark Zuckerberg, so that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, I mean, even these days, Ann Arbor is a phenomenal school, engineering.
Yeah. No, it's a really wonderful school. So many great areas.
So what was your first car?
My first car was a BMW 2002.
Oh, incredible.
Yeah. I had it when I was 17. It was
what color?
Back when they were not very expensive, of course. It was navy blue, like a midnight blue color. It was really beautiful. And it had a Nardi wheel too, which was super cool because the stock wheel is terrible looking on those cars, but it had a beautiful Nardi wood wheel that the previous owner had put in.
Awesome. Yeah, there's an orange one in my neighborhood. I don't know like the color names of that.
Well, there's Inca orange, and then there's one other shade of orange I can't remember.
And then there's like almost like a limey green one that goes to a Cars and Coffee that I often attend.
I feel like in Southern California, you probably see 2002s like all the time.
Yeah, I wouldn't say all the time, but maybe that's San Diego versus LA. I don't know.
Maybe.
But I'm sure they're around for sure. Those two are the most common for certain. Yeah. So what was your first job out of college?
So when I graduated, it was 2003, and there was actually a mini recession going on.
Right,
which I feel like people don't remember that little blip or whatever, but it was kind of a crappy time to graduate from college.
I was talking about this on another podcast, actually.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, so I didn't have a job lined up. I was applying to various places, and so I actually went back home to Chicago, and I went back into my room, which was totally not what I expected to find myself doing, but it was fine. And I was freelancing in Chicago in various design firms there.
Okay.
And then I was applying for permanent jobs, and it came down to I had a job offer at Motorola, and then I had a job offer in New York at the Arnell Group, which was a branding agency. And I was really, really torn because the Motorola at that time was kind of hot at that time with the Razr and all that stuff. And it was way before the iPhone came out. So that was kind of like a cool studio that you would want to work for.
And was that in San Francisco?
No, in Chicago.
Oh, it was in Chicago?
Yeah. Motorola is based in Illinois. So
they
actually had an office out in the suburbs, and then they had a design studio on somewhere off of Michigan Avenue in downtown Chicago, which is where I would have been going back and forth between those two studios. Mm-hmm. And it was really, really tempting, but in the end I chose the job in New York, which was paying less money. But I chose it because I wanted to I don't know, I just didn't want to get siloed into consumer electronics immediately.
Sure.
And so I ended up working at the Arnell Group, which is no longer exists, but it was a agency that it was kind of a boutique advertising and branding agency that was owned by Omnicom Group, which is a huge advertising conglomerate. So it was like a sort of a boutique firm that they owned.
So what kind of accounts were you on?
So the biggest clients were Pepsi, Reebok, DKNY. The DKNY brand was created by Arnell, and so was the RBK brand of Reebok.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
And the current Pepsi branding was done by Arnell shortly, kind of at the end of my time there. I didn't work on it, but I was involved in the project in general, but I didn't work on the logo. So
they were just really anti-vowels?
Yeah, he hates vowels. He thought it was a cool idea to like, the RBK thing was he took the Reebok logo and he like scratched out the vowels basically. And he's like, the RBK. And, and it was like, but, he sold the idea and it like, it was really good. It really rejuvenated the brand actually.
Right.
At the time.
Just so many companies ended up doing that. Just like
subtracting
vowels and calling it a brand.
And he was also involved in things like the idea. He was the one that had the idea to connect shoe brands with hip hop artists.
Yeah.
To like on a high,
Jay-Z,
like the S.
yeah.
Carter brand was like something that Peter created with Jay-Z and like made that happen. And that was like, again, is like a brilliant idea. He was like, well, if athletes can have a shoe, like why can't a rapper have a shoe? Like they should totally have a shoe. People want that. And that was like an idea that he pushed, and they, created that subgenre basically through that idea. So he was really a genius guy, but he was also like a difficult person to work for, and the company eventually kind of had a lot of problems.
Got it. Now, and how long were you there for?
I was there for 3.5 years, which is like dog years. Like that's like 10 years for like people would quit in 6 months. So like 3.5 years.
Oh, just
I was like
a meat grinder.
Yeah. Like there was almost nobody left from when I started there when I left.
So what do you think about yourself was able to just handle it?
Well, I was fortunate for a couple of reasons. One, Peter seemed to like me, so I didn't really get like much crap. So I was kind of under the radar a little. I was also pretty junior. So again, like the closer you were up to the top level of the company, the higher the pressure and the crazier things were. And so because I was an entry level employee, I was kind of like out of the fray a little bit. So the combination of like, whenever he was in the studio and saw me, he was nice to me. And then also I wasn't seeing him that often, and I was just doing my work. I was kind of okay there. And also it was really fun. The hours were terrible, but you got to do lots of different stuff. And the great thing about it was really, like I said before, that working at Arnell Group was like an education on so many things of like, how, I could never have created this brand without the experiences that I had working there in terms of how you craft all these different aspects of an image of a brand and so on. So that was really educational.
What's a couple of examples of that then?
Just things like even just typography. You had to be able to lay things out very quickly. You had to not just come up with one item, but think about like a whole range of products and how they all fit together and how they would be presented. And like I was designing like point of purchase displays too. So it was like literally like, this is how it would be in the store. This is how the box would look. This is how this, so now I design all my own packaging. I design all of my own products. I design all of the print ads. Everything that in Autodromo I design. So again, it goes back to that training from working there.
Yeah, it's very cool. So where did you didn't start Autodromo immediately after that?
No.
Yeah, so where'd you go after that?
I wanted to be a furniture designer.
Oh, interesting.
I've said this in a previous interview, so forgive me, people that have heard other interviews, but back in college, I interned for a furniture designer called Karam Rashid, who's at the time, again, was a very famous designer. A lot of people like love or hate him. I think now the majority of people, I don't know if, he was very controversial at the time, let's just say.
Borrowing ideas and that kind of thing?
Well, his style of design was very inspired by late 60s, early 70s pop and futuristic space age furniture design. And so lots of like white space and then like really like vibrant pops of color. He loved using like electric pinks and greens, like these really acid colors. And some people just thought it was just totally tasteless and crass and derivative. That's what that his detractors would say. But then there were other people that would say, well, but he's he's making things fun, like he's doing like crazy stuff that's new, and he's bringing back the spirit of the space age, which was all about the future, and he's not just making like boring contract furniture, which there was a lot of really boring contract furniture at that time. So, he was like pushing a lot of envelopes, and I think not everyone liked what he was doing, but his name was everywhere. He was it was a big deal for me to get an internship there. And that really started my career off, frankly, because that was my first resume line that would open the door for a lot of different places. Sure. So working there, he gave me one piece of advice in my exit interview, because he said, well, like, what do you want to do with, what's your goal? And I said, well, I would love to have my own studio one day like you do. That's my dream, is to design furniture and have my own studio. And when I get out of school, I want to start doing that. And he was like, oh, Bradley, one day you'll have your studio, but you got to work for somebody for like 10 years. You can't just go and like start a studio like that out of school. You got to learn from other people. And I was kind of discouraged by that, but he was like 110% right.
Yeah.
And that was some of the best advice I ever got. And so I always appreciate that he said that, because it's really true that when you're 23 years old, you think you know everything and you know nothing. And
I joke that like at 25, everybody thinks they know everything, only to find out at 35, you know nothing.
That's actually good advice for people in their early 20s. The sooner you understand and appreciate that you know nothing, the more successful you will actually be.
Yeah.
Because I've managed a lot of interns over the years, and I have to say, like, 23-year-old men are like the worst people to manage, because they come out of school, they got such a huge ego, they're eager to prove their chops in the world, and they have great skills because they're freshly minted graduates or whatever. And I'm talking about designers here, but I think it's probably true in a lot of fields. But they just don't want to listen to anybody, what anybody has to say. It's like, no, I know.
And God forbid it's not in a textbook,
Yeah, and you're like, no, you don't know. But it's like, I appreciate the verve, but it sometimes you just need them to just do what you ask them to do.
Yeah, 100%. So.
And I was one of those people, by the way.
Sure.
I was totally that guy.
I'm pretty
but now
sure
that I'm
we
older,
all are.
I realize now that was being that headstrong person. It didn't necessarily help things early on.
Right.
But
so then, how did you get Autodromo off the ground? Then, what were those years? What was that transition like?
Well, so then after the Arnell Group, I went to another design firm that was much more of a product design and furniture. Like there was more of a, let's just say that they actually did stuff that got made as opposed to just designs that were mainly pitches. At Arnell, we did a lot of pitches. So that things didn't have to work. You just had to be like, here, look at this cool thing. It's like futuristic. And at this other firm called Echo, we were designing like more production-oriented things. So then I really learned a lot about how to engineer stuff, how things are molded. Again, this was another phase of my education that I didn't have as a 23-year-old, which is like, okay, now I understand the way that molds actually work, what kind of things are makeable, and how to also discuss them with engineers, and how to win arguments with engineers, and how to also sell these ideas to the client. And again, those are all things that nobody teaches you in school at all, at any price, is like how to deal with a client or how to deal with an engineer at the client's company.
Yeah, because those aspects entail personalities on the other end too that you can't manipulate, you can't predict.
Yeah,
so you never know what you're going to get.
I've often thought a great college course would be where you essentially pretend to be the client, and then you just like shoot down every fucking thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, just call it design argument 101.
Yeah. And I mean, it would probably like flummox the students so much to have the level of like kind of apathy or downright, kind of negativity that you actually face in real life. But, I think it would be character building, and helpful. But, I don't run a college, so
Right.
that course will never happen.
Maybe you could do that in your retirement.
Yeah, just be a grumpy old man.
Yeah. Oh man, that's
No,
hilarious.
but it's not about shooting people down, but it is about teaching people that you have to think on your feet and be able to defend your idea and describe why it will work and why it should be done, and not just say, well, but it'll look cooler, or like, but it's better. Because no one cares about those things. Like, that's not enough.
And it can be so subjective too.
Yes, yeah. And guess what? When it comes down to subjective things, who wins? The client who's paying for it, or you?
Right. Right.
So you have to be able to defend those decisions. And actually, one of the reasons why I love being in this position now, running my own company, is that I don't have to do those things. If I think something will be better or it will look cooler and it costs more money, I have to make my own calculus about that. But at the end of the day, I'm accountable. It's my money I'm putting on the line, and I'm willing to pay more money on the cost of the product if it's going to be so much cooler and so much better made. And that's really what I think a lot of our customers appreciate about the watches that we make and the packaging that we make and all that stuff, is that there's no cost cutting. There's no, oh, well, we'll just use this off the shelf thing, it'll be cheaper. That kind of stuff really is an anathema to me.
Was there a recent example that you can kind of illustrate that best with?
Sure. The box on the Inter Europa is a box that should probably be on like a $10,000 watch. And it's on a $1,250 watch, but it's like a lacquered box with a high polished finish. It has a beautifully made cloisonné badge in the middle of the lid, which is hand applied. And, it's a beautiful, beautiful piece of packaging, and I'm very proud of it. And people immediately, when they see it, they just say, wow, look at that box. Like, it's beautiful. And I wanted it to be beautiful because all of the packaging that I do is about creating the atmosphere surrounding the watch that you're about to receive or that you're about to open. So if you immediately start off that journey on like a cheap, crummy note, and then no matter how nice the watch is, you've already like undermined the experience when you open a cheap-looking box, no matter how nice the watch inside is.
Do you find a lot of your customers continually store their watches in its box?
I think I try to design the boxes in such a way that they can be used like that. Like, not everyone has been that way, but I try to make them thin enough that like you can put them in a drawer, or like I hate those boxes you might see on something like a Rolex where it's like a cube the size of like a small television,
right? And
then you open it, and then and there's this little thing in the middle.
It's it becomes Russian dolls.
Yeah. Like, I hate that stuff. Even for the Ford GT owner's watch, which is a very higher end watch, and it has a really sweet box, which is made out of billet aluminum. I still wanted it to be at a scale that you could put that on your desk if you wanted to just have that billet aluminum box and put cigars in it or whatever. Right. You could use it on your desktop and in your garage or whatever. It gives you that option. Whereas if it was some like lacquered wood box with a little key that you open it, what are you supposed to do with that? You're never going to like put the watch back in there again. It's going to be in your closet taking up space. Right. So and then it's like, well, what's the point? So I do try to think about the secondary life of it when I'm designing them.
Well, we kind of jump forward just a tad, but what was the jump off point for Autodromo then?
Sure.
Like, when did you wake up one day and be like, man, I got to start a watch company?
No, but I did wake up one day and say, man, I really miss thinking about cars. I really miss car stuff in general, car culture. I didn't really have very many car friends at the time, and I I just wanted to get back to that because that was my upbringing and my life before. And so that was part of it. I did wake up and say, oh, this is like a part of me that's missing. And I actually started a blog called Automobiliac. And part of the reason for the blog was to be able to write articles about cars and share pictures of cars. And I would go to, concours events and take pictures and post galleries of the pictures. It was just a lot of people, like you were saying, you yourself had a blog like this type of thing.
Right.
That was kind of the thing to do at the time. And I actually did make some really good friends that I'm still friends with today through that also ran other blogs, and we're still friends now, and we talk about other stuff. But
that's cool.
Yeah, so that actually started the process of me kind of getting to reconnect with that side of myself, of running that site and chronicling my interests and talking about, like this new car, what do I think of it, like with the design or whatever, or here's a historical thing that people should know about.
Was your blog kind of focused on any brand in particular?
No.
Was there any common
although
thread?
Alfa Romeo was I had, one of those clouds of all the tags, and they were like scaled in proportion to how many times they were mentioned.
Yes.
And the Alfa Romeo tag was like huge.
Were you on
And
Blogger?
then everything else
was on Blogspot?
It was on Squarespace.
Okay. Oh, this is early days.
The site
of
still
Squarespace.
exists. I mean, it's still there, but I haven't updated it in years.
Oh, cool.
But so then after starting Automobiliac, I was getting more and more into the car world again. And then I bought my first car that I had bought since I moved to New York, because I didn't have a car for years.
Which was what?
It was a 83 Alfa GTV6.
Sweet.
And so I had that car in Brooklyn, and I would drive it out of the city to go for drives and, go to Lime Rock or whatever. I did a few track days in the car, and that was great. And then now that I had been driving again and experiencing the roads around here, that was where I started getting this idea of creating a lifestyle brand that the idea originally was that it would make you feel like you were driving when you were stuck in a meeting. That was like the original kernel of the idea, was that you would look down at your wrist and you'd see this gauge-inspired watch, and you'd think, man, I can't wait to go driving this weekend. Like, I love this watch. I love the car. That I love thinking about driving, even when I'm supposed to be doing serious things. And that was kind of the original kernel of the idea.
Cool. So what was the first model you designed?
Well, the first collection was one case design, and we had a series of different dials that each had different model names. So there was the Veloce, the Vallelunga, the Brescia, and then there was also the Vallelunga chronograph. And the Vallelunga was probably the most popular model, although the Veloce sold really well as well. But those were our first few models, and they were based on specific gauges, vintage car gauges, of course. And I also wanted the brand to have an Italian theme, because I really love Italian cars and Italian design. So that was where the name came, partly from that, but also I just like the name Autodromo. I like the word, and it also works in many languages, and it just seemed right. I thought of other names potentially that I don't even remember now, but that name just stuck very quickly.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, it's catchy and it's memorable too.
Yeah.
It has auto.
Yeah, it has auto in it.
So
and somehow like the Dromo part, I think somehow weirdly seems to relate to time, and I don't know why. Maybe it's like metronome, Dromo. It's like a phonetic thing. It's not like a meaning thing, but it just somehow I've been told by people that it made them think of like car or time somehow.
What was distribution like early days? How were you distributing these and like advertising and that sort of thing?
Well, again, going back to the topic of blogs, initially there was a lot of coverage in blogs about the watches when they first hit. Most notably, of course, Hodinkee was the first post ever about Autodromo. So we launched on Hodinkee years ago, and there were quite a few blogs like that wrote about us, and that had really avid followers. And in particular, Uncrate was one site that, initially when you would get posted on Uncrate, it would just be like a huge flood of orders. It would just come in like that day.
Wow.
And it was amazing. It was like manna from heaven, when you're starting a company and like you get a few posts on some sites and then immediately you're getting orders and like money's coming in. And yeah, so that was really, really great. And
you had the inventory ready.
Yeah, I did, because this was before, so Kickstarter existed, but it wasn't like today. It wasn't like a huge thing. It was really more like for like artists and people trying to make a movie or something. It wasn't like so product focused. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't plugged into a whole manufacturing ecosystem as well, that today people are sourcing things and selling things. And it's all kind of like you can almost like feed it. It's almost a machine.
So were you using that?
No. So I'm saying like it was before that Kickstarter was really a thing. So I had to fund it myself and I had to get the word out myself. There was no like mechanism ready-made to spread the word and get people to pre-order stuff so that you didn't have to lay out any money.
So what was your production like? How many pieces did you have to order for? I'm assuming you were shooting for a minimum, right?
Yeah, the minimum was 500 pieces to start.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I started with an initial order of 500 watches, and they sold like pretty quickly. It wasn't like an overnight success, but I mean it took off, and I was able to go down to 3 days a week at my job, and took a pay cut, but it was, at least I had time to like work on it.
Sure.
And my boss was supportive of it. I didn't tell him at all about it when I was developing it, right. But after it launched, I finally told him about it, and he was like happy for me, I think. So
that's cool.
Yeah, it was good. And then eventually after about 7 months, I left. Or I was kind of pushed out. But
and what year was that?
That was I left in 2012, but the brand launched in 2011.
Okay, so you're 9 years into this.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. What
are some of your thoughts these days about kind of the proliferation of the micro brand?
I mean, I'd like to be enthusiastic about it, but I think that it's gone a little too far. I think there's too much stuff out there, and the quality of things is all over the place. Mm-hmm. And there's plenty of new brands that are even like a year old that are good, that are being run by passionate individuals who are dedicated to good quality. And then there's just a ton of just junk.
Right.
And stuff that has no point of view, no creativity, no originality, and no quality. And it's competing for, it's like a bunch of trees competing for light, and a bunch of the trees are just weeds, and there's a few good trees. And it's a shame that has to be the way it is. But that's kind of the new nature of the internet these days, I think, is that there's just a lot of junk out there, and now consumers are faced with the challenge of sifting through all of it.
I was just about to say, now we have this momentous problem of sifting as consumers.
Yeah, in the old days, the blogs were sifting through it for you, and that's why when someone like, Gear Patrol or Uncrate posted something, it meant something, that like, this is good. Like, we say this is good, and then people would buy it. But now those sites, and I'm not criticizing them, they're still great sites, but I'm just saying they have to have content all the time, and there's constant like influx of just all this new stuff constantly. And I think they still have a strong curatorial bent, but I'm just saying that there's a lot more stuff now. Sure. And so and there's a lot more pressure on them because these are big sites now. They're not just a guy or a couple guys like back in the day.
Right.
They have a staff. They have, they have overhead. There's all these other challenges that everybody's facing as we've all come up together. There's been a parallel growth of these websites alongside of the growth of these small independent brands that they promoted. And so now there's a lot of people trying to get into that space, and there's a pressure to post more and more stuff all the time. And so again, the consumer has a lot more choice, and they have a lot more, it's a paradox of choice where there's just too many things and then you don't want to buy anything.
Right. And I wonder how many of those sites operate based on marketing dollars getting thrown at them, like saying, hey, we'll pay you to host us. I don't know anything about that because I've never had to do it nor been a part of it, but I wonder if that's...
I mean, there's certainly sponsored posts on sites. I'm not saying any specific site.
Right, sure.
But there's plenty of sponsored posts, but I think it's not even just that. What I think it really comes down to is the traffic that has to be generated means that you need to have a lot of new stuff to talk about every single day. And so in the old days, maybe some blogger would slave for several days to write up a single watch brand, and that might be the only post that week, or maybe they did 2 or 3 posts that week, but now they've got to write up a brand daily. So then the net becomes much wider because if you're only writing about the very best of stuff, you can't just... What if there's nothing good this week? What are you going to write about, right?
Yeah.
You're going to write about the same brands as before. And then, so I think that, again, without casting aspersions on any specific site, and I know a lot of people in the field that are trying really hard, and they're all honest people that are working hard, but it's like the game has changed because there's a pressure to have daily content that's almost hourly content even.
Right.
That's new and like something that people haven't seen. And so I think that's a lot of pressure that they have. And unfortunately for us, it makes our message harder to get out because there's just a lot more noise.
Are you a watch collector but having trouble finding something cool and unique? I mean, the last thing you really want is what everyone else has, right? Well, this is where my friend and former Standard H podcast guest Tim Jackson comes in. He and his wife Jana own Passion Fine Jewelry in Solana Beach, California, where you'll find an incredible assortment of independent watches waiting for you in their shop and online. And if you're getting engaged, have an anniversary coming up, or simply have another reason to buy jewelry, they have you covered. Passion Fine Jewelry also employs a goldsmith on staff for any custom desires, so you're able to go that route if you so choose. Visit Passion Fine Jewelry when you find yourself in Southern California, but they're also open 24 hours a day at passionfinejewelry.com. You can also find a wealth of information through Tim's blog, independentintime.com, where he covers anything independent watchmaking related, among a plethora of other information, so check that out as well. I've really enjoyed creating these podcasts on behalf of Standard H and sharing each of these personal stories with all of you. We each have goals, and it's the entrepreneurial spirit that inspired me to start the company. You can further support the brand and the podcast by visiting standard-h.com to pick up your choice of merchandise, and as always, thank you for listening. Lastly, if you have a moment, please rate and review the show. It makes a tremendous difference in keeping these things going. Now back to my conversation with Bradley. I feel like you sort of alluded to this answer anyway, but what would you consider sort of the, not ideals, but the aspects to Autodromo that set you apart from other brands?
I think what sets us apart, first and foremost, is just that the point of view is one person's point of view, first of all. So it's my point of view. It's my passion. It's my aesthetic sense. And that's a special thing that I can bring to the table, I guess, and that people seem to appreciate. So that's the first thing. But also, as I alluded to before, the commitment to doing something special every time and not just phoning it in. And to try to, to create a new watch every year, because every single year we've come out with a completely new watch from the ground up, completely new with new packaging. And alongside that, we've relaunched, of course, different colorways of existing watches. But every November, except when we did the Group B Series 2, that wasn't a totally new watch, but that's the only time that we ever didn't launch a completely new watch in November. And the only reason, friends, for that is because I was working so hard on the Ford GT watch that I just didn't have the bandwidth to develop a totally secondary watch and launch that at the same moment as I was slaving away on the owner's watch. So that's why we couldn't do a completely new watch that year. But it's, but every time that I'm doing this, it's like a labor of love, and I want it to be a special experience when you buy it and you open it, that you're going to be delighted, and that you're also going to really love wearing it, and you're not going to get tired of it in a few months, and it's not going to fall apart in a few months. It's going to last you for years, and those are all really important values. And I think that some brands, they do make stuff that falls apart in a few months, or it's like it looks great in the photos and the case finishing is completely shoddy. I'm like a real stickler for case finishing. It's, if you read reviews of our products, that's something that many very experienced watch reviewers will mention, is that the case finishing is at a very high level. And that comes down to the fact that I'm willing to spend the money to do the things right and not just kind of slap things together.
What was the worst experience you've had with manufacturing as far as getting it right? Like, has there been a time where you've had to be like, no, like 4 or 5 times, or like, what is that conversation like?
I've never had to throw things away like multiple times, because I'm very fortunate to work with some really good vendors that also have high standards. And they also understand, I've worked with a number of these companies for years, and they know that I don't tolerate crap. So they don't they don't try to pull one over.
Right.
Like, they know that I'm going to send it back and say, this isn't good enough, or this isn't right, or can this be improved? And so they've gotten to the point where we understand each other. So that's been great. I think the biggest challenge is delays due to various out-of-control factors that can play havoc with your launch deadlines. It was also challenging working with Ford to do the GT watches, because, again, for the first time since my old design days, I had even though I'm the one paying for the watch to be made, I'm still like working essentially with a client, and they have to be happy as well, because I'm putting their name on the watch and it's being sold to their customers. So I take that very seriously, but they also have to be happy, right? So that was a challenge to make sure we were all working together and all equally happy with the product.
Yeah, I would imagine it's, kind of a song and dance a little bit, because of, if the watch is ready before the box is, you can't ship the watch without the box. And if you're
we had that problem.
Oh, have you? Yeah. So
we've had that problem, because when the Ford thing happened, some people know this story, but especially if you ordered one of the watches, if you were one of the first people to order it, everything was going great. Everything was on schedule. And then, the boxes for that watch, for the Ford GT consumer watch, not the owner's watch, but the one that we sell to the public for $695, that box is produced in China. And the Ford logo on the box, it caused the boxes to be stopped by customs in China, because they wanted to verify, because the Chinese have been standing up more to piracy than in the past. So there was a whole snafu involving getting those boxes out of China, and they were delayed for well over a month. And I had to constantly bother people in Dearborn and bother people that worked for people in Dearborn, that worked in Hong Kong, oh man, it was a real pain to deal with getting those things released by customs, because I had to get Ford to like vouch for the fact that I'm like a real licensee, and so that was it's a very small problem for them, let's just say.
Right. Yeah.
It's a big problem for me. So that was a pain to deal with. But eventually we got the boxes out, but not until after we had sold like a lot of watches and Christmas was coming. So I had to like slap together a temporary package to ship, because I was like, I don't want to have people not have a Christmas gift.
Right.
That would suck.
Yeah.
So I had to like literally I sourced some things on Uline basically, and then printed stickers to put on them. And it was like rush packaging for the holidays. And I had to completely improvise the whole thing in about 48 hours to try to deliver watches to people in time for Christmas, because I kept waiting, hoping that those boxes were going to be released. And they didn't end up coming until, I think, late January. And meanwhile, we had sold like a lot of watches. And a lot of those watches were bought, by the way, by Ford GT owners who were the people that I'm trying to sell the expensive watch to. And it's like super embarrassing, because now I'm like coming off as like an amateur hour while we're trying, so that whole situation was probably one of the worst challenges of my time running this business, was just dealing with that headache.
Sure.
With customs.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. How did you find manufacturing early on then? Because it's not like there's so many manufacturers to choose from, I would guess, for either cases or movements or whatever.
Yeah, sure. And also again, going back to today, people are literally sourcing stuff on Alibaba from God knows whatever factory that put up a bunch of pictures of stolen pictures of watches that they don't even make.
Right.
I've had to have people take pictures of my stuff down from Alibaba that they're like trying to say, like, oh, we could,
produce it.
Yeah, like they removed my logo and then they put photos that actually, the photos that I found were actually from Worn and Wound, that they had been sort of scraped off the internet, and then some company in China was putting them on their site as like, you could order this watch or that watch. With your name on it or whatever. So we had to deal with that. That's another thing, another headache for another time. But so I went to the Hong Kong Watch and Clock Fair, which is held every year in like September, October. And I physically met with factory representatives and looked at samples of what they'd make and compared the quality of the different factories, and that's how I chose the partner that I work with. They were actually the most expensive factory that I talked to. Like when I would ask them, like, what would this cost, like 500 units of this piece cost or whatever. And at first I was kind of afraid because, I was launching my new company. I didn't want to break the bank. But at the end of the day, the quality was so much better, and I liked their approach. And so I've been with the same supplier for the entire time that we've been in business.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Because so many times, like as you scale, a lot of people are driven to find another manufacturer that could produce higher quantities.
Well, actually, we're ironically in the inverse position, which is that we are one of the lowest volume manufacturers that this client builds watches for. But they like working with me because I challenge their engineers to do weird things that they don't have to do every day.
That was my next question.
And I have a lot of, and they told me this. They said, and you understand like that we make high quality products. Like you appreciate the finishing.
Right.
Like we have clients that are just beating us up over price. Like, they don't like. They don't want to deal with people like that because they have like more work than they can handle anyway, and they want to work with clients that are appreciative of what their capability is and not just trying to lower the price every day.
Right. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned the Ford GT stuff. You've obviously done some pretty special collaborations as a result. How did that exactly come about? Like, how did that opportunity come to fruition?
So what happened was that the one day I got this Facebook message from this guy named Chris Svensson, and the worst part of it is it went into my there's
junk
like
mail?
there's like the secret inbox in Facebook where like it's like a spam folder essentially, but it's not obvious when you have messages there. So like things can just sit there. And basically like he had sent me a message and then I didn't even see it for like, I don't know, 2 weeks or something. And I looked at it and it was like, oh, hi, I'm the design director of Ford North America, and we're looking for watch partners for the Ford GT, and are you interested in talking about that? And I was like, oh my God, how did I miss this message? Oh my God. So I immediately wrote him back and said, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm apologizing profusely. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean any disrespect. I didn't see the message. It was in my other folder. And anyway, he was really nice. And it turned out that he was a customer, that he had bought a few watches of mine.
Very cool.
And there were a few people at Ford that were owning our products. And he was just like, I really like what you're doing. I think it's clear that you're a real car person. You're clearly an enthusiast. And we're talking to various companies, but I really want to throw your hat in the ring if you're okay with that. And I said, well, yeah, that would be great. And originally the idea was that I was just going to do the consumer watch. But then when I sent them the design proposal for that, they really liked it. And at the same time, they were getting some proposals for the owner's watch that they really didn't like. And they said, why don't you just give us something to present in a meeting for the owner's watch, and let's see what happens.
So they had the idea of having two variations to begin with.
Yes, there was always the idea that there would be a high-end watch for owners of a GT that would be ideally customizable to match their car, which we can get back to that in a bit, because that's really challenging to do.
Yeah.
There was going to be that watch, and they were talking to like Swiss brands mainly about that. And then there was going to be the consumer watch, which is going to be sold to the general public, like fans of Ford. And that was the original thing that I was going to just do. So in the end, I ended up getting both of the projects. And that was a big deal for me. It was a real honor, but it was also super challenging from a design point of view, how to design two watches at completely different, disparate price points. They're talking one watch contractually, they said, we want to make it should be at least $10,000 price point. And the other watch should be, well under $1,000. And so I'm like, okay, and how do I brand these so that, people don't get confused that, which is which? And we do have occasional confusion, but I think that they're different enough and the marketing is different enough that we haven't had too much trouble with that. But
what are some of the differences other than packaging?
Oh, well, they're completely different watches. They are there's no components whatsoever shared between them. The movement for the Ford. So what I did was I started with the price point. I said, okay, well, if the watch is going to be at least $10,000, what should the movement be? So that's always the first question. What is the movement going to be?
Right.
The movement should be something pretty damn nice. So I talked to some people, like I talked to the folks at Hodinkee, I talked to the folks at Worn and Wound, et cetera, and just picked their brain a bit like, well, what would you like to see? If you were this guy who's just bought a $500,000 car, well, what features would you expect to see in a watch that would go with that car? And, and I know a lot too, but I wanted to hear what they had to say, right? So, again, we kind of settled into, well, it should be a flyback chronograph, a racing chronograph, but with flyback and a column wheel. And so I started, so I basically ended up focusing on that type of movement, and that's a pretty pricey movement. And the one that we use is made by La Joux-Perret in Switzerland. It's a Valjoux-based movement, but with a lot of much higher grade decoration. and also with the flyback mechanism, which is their mechanism, and the column wheel added. So it's really like a beautifully made movement.
Awesome.
So that's like the heart of the watch. And then all of the other things, like the case is ceramic, and the hands are actually made of sapphire crystal. And that's a feature that is very, very unusual, that you don't see that anywhere, really.
No.
Hour and minute hands are transparent sapphire crystal with like a sort of thin border printed on them. And then the entire dial of the watch, above the color fields of like the body color of the car, that whole layer is sapphire as well. And that's also made in Switzerland. So there's a lot of expensive parts in this watch. It was really critical for me that the customer should know that we didn't just mark up some normal watch and slap a Ford logo on it and tell them, hey, this is 12 grand. No, this is a watch that legitimately in a watch store would sell for more than 12 grand. If you look at the specs, this would be easily in that price range just based on what it's made of. And so I wanted it to stand up to that level of scrutiny, that it shouldn't seem like a reach. You know what I mean? And conversely, the GT consumer watch, it had to be of high enough quality that it shouldn't look really cheap compared to the other watch, but it shouldn't be equally nice either, of course. So that was the balance that I was trying to strike was difficult.
Well, I think it's obviously been successful. So, and you were going to speak about the coloring.
Yeah. So the biggest challenge with that project, other than the whole licensing side of it, was the how do you design a watch that's meant to be assembled to order, each one individually made, to match the color spec of the customer's car. Because as you know, my watches are produced in larger batches of hundreds of pieces at once. And, I design several colorways and then they just make them. This couldn't be done that way. So it required thinking about how the watch comes apart in terms of, okay, well, if the dial has to be able to be painted any color. Like we did paint at the factory a number of dials in the standard exterior colors of the car, but well over 25% of the GTs are extended palette colors. And I actually think it might be even higher than that now, because if you look at online, if you follow GT stuff, like every day there's a new extended palette car being delivered to somebody. And so we had to be able to provide that, because if the guy has a car that's grabber blue or some other crazy Ferrari or McLaren color, because a lot of people are using colors from other companies, we got to be able to paint it. And so I designed it so the dial has no printing on it. So that way we can always paint the dial and not have to reprint the dial somehow or anything like that.
That's smart.
And so all of the numbers and graphics and everything are printed on a disc of sapphire, which sits on top of the dial and creates a three-dimensional effect. And so the sapphire dials are only printed in a couple of colors, but the dial is infinitely paintable, essentially. So that was one solution of how to achieve that goal. And then, of course, all the hands had to be done in the various brake caliper colors, because I always ask people so if they have like a black car with red calipers, you'd have a black dial with red subdial hands and red chronograph hands, basically. So it kind of, that little accent pop will be corresponding to that color.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Another collaboration you've got cooking that I just recently heard about, and of course I can delete this if you want me to, but was the Build-A-Watch for the Horological Society of New York.
Oh, you heard about that? Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's secret or not. You'd have to ask them, or I can find out for you if you want. I don't believe it's secret, but
they told me about it.
They told you about it, so hey.
But they told me that it would exist. They didn't tell me anything else. I was like, well, I'm actually talking to Bradley, so I'll ask him about it.
Yeah, that was a really fun project. It's not over, like we're still working on it, but it was really refreshing to do a watch. I was really honored that they approached me to do the design.
Absolutely.
I'm really proud to do it as a New York-based watch designer and to do it for the HSNY. And basically, I was trying to think what could be a way of expressing New York in a watch without resorting to the kind of stupid, tourist crap level of stuff.
Big Apple.
But yeah. There's an Apple that
in the subdial.
There's a complication on the case back, which is like the New Year's Eve ball dropping every second.
Right.
No, it's the idea was that to me the most beautiful thing in New York is the Art Deco skyscraper, and that's also one of my favorite periods of design in general because I love modernism, and to me it also represents the most optimistic period of New York when it was literally springing into the sky every day. People were walking down the street in amazement that there are these tall buildings and like, wow, look at that. This is America. This is New York. And to me, that is the feeling of New York that still pervades to this day, is that the idea that you should be walking down the street in amazement, I think is a very New York thing. And of course, New Yorkers are jaded, but I still think that's the soul of what attracts people to New York, is this idea of the optimism, of the possibility, of the grandeur.
Yeah,
So,
as somebody who's never lived here, I completely concur. I think it's, there's an energy the second you get off the airplane.
Yeah. Oh, that's for sure. Yeah, there is definitely an electricity in the air that you feel. And so with the watch design for that program, I wanted something. Again, whenever I do something vintage inspired, I don't try to make a literal copy of it. I try to take some of the essence of what I like about that object and distill it and then feed it through my own consciousness, I guess, and bring it out into a new thing. So with that watch, it's not a 30s watch, and it's not, it's actually pretty minimal. Like there's no numbers on the dial. It's just, the idea was to take a dial that's like a single piece of metal and then just finish it with different finishes. So there's like a polished part and of a chapter ring, and then there's a circular brushed part, and then there's a subdial that's circular brushed. And then there's just very, very clean, simple typography for the logo.
Sure.
And then the hands are kind of meant to look like a shape of a skyscraper, but they're also kind of meant to look like the hands that you would see on one of those old elevator indicators that's like going up, like you would see in the lobby of a Art Deco building. Yeah. And then the case itself is a spun shape with kind of horizontal bands going around the outside of the case, which again, it's a very like streamlined era kind of design motif. But I was kind of inspired in general by Rockefeller Plaza and by the interior of Rockefeller Plaza and the kind of material finishes they have and the aesthetic of that building, because I think it's just one of the most magnificent buildings in New York.
Yeah, iconic for sure. What, going back to sort of the automotive influence of the brand, are there any particular standout cars that you kind of attribute to? Aside from the Ford GT, obviously.
You mean like as far as watches that we've made?
Yeah.
They're not necessarily based on specific cars, although the early stuff definitely there was like specific gauges, but now I've tried to make things a bit more abstracted. So like the Group B is based on the gauge from the Lancia 037 rally car, not from the street version, but the actual rally car. But it's really like, I wanted to take the time period of the 80s and that, the aesthetic of that time, as well as the actual motorsport influences of that time, and try to like meld that together into one holistic design. So, it's a combination of like making explicit reference to the past, but also kind of blurring it. I don't know how to describe it, but it's like
Well,
it should never be too literal. Then it just kills it, So, like the Inter Europa, it is based on gauges that you would find in Cisitalias and 1950s Ferrari Barchettas. There's a specific gauge that was a jumping off point for the watch. But I was trying to generally capture the feeling of 50s racing Berlinettas and like kind of early 50s Italian sporting cars.
Well, I've tried to describe your product to those who don't know it because I've got a lot of friends that aren't into watches at all. And I've always just described your products as automotive influence, and it is kind of on the nose, but done better than anybody else that's doing automotive influence stuff. And, I don't know. I mean, that's just the way that I've described it to people.
Thank you.
Thank sure. You. Yeah, no. And I mean it.
Thanks.
So as far as so many other watches being inspired by cars, why would you, I mean, I guess you sort of alluded to this as well, as sort of the blurred line of the literal derivation of these designs, right? Like, is that what you would characterize your differences as?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously, I like to have kind of Easter eggs for people that are really knowledgeable, that they immediately know, like, oh, that's from that car. But it's not like I didn't just copy and paste the dial onto an Illustrator drawing and send it to the factory, which is like probably what some people actually do, and it always comes out terrible then,
right?
Or it comes out kind of lifeless, and I think that you have to always be playing with like how much detail do you add or subtract to bring the thing to where you want it to be, and I think the key with watch design in general is about the balance of negative space and detail and how many busy little things you want versus not having anything. And those balances between those things is what makes a watch interesting, or it makes it overwrought, or it makes it too plain where it just looks cheap. Mm-hmm. So that's where the kind of rubber meets the road is in making those decisions. And that's, again, I think going back to your previous question, another thing that's what sets us apart is the decisions that are made are really, really carefully considered.
I love the idea of the Easter egg hunt. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I just, anything that can solicit a double take is what I love most. I don't know why. Maybe that's a little bit, that's what I tried to sort of achieve with even my logo, is that like, wait, what is that? Oh, that's the gear shift. You know,
yeah,
like
exactly.
That whole thing.
Yeah,
like, I love the solicitation of the second look, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And it's also the reward of like when you know something, that you know what that's from, or you know what that is, you're like, oh, that's cool. Or you can explain it to someone else and they go, oh, I get it. Yeah.
Right.
And that's like what makes it a conversation piece and not just an object.
100%.
I think that's something that people appreciate about the watches.
Sure. This is something interesting. You had a daughter 7 months ago.
Yeah.
What is
a little baby girl at home?
and you know, you're predominantly a one-man band, right?
Yeah.
So what is the work-life balance like? How do you do that?
Well, I've been taking more like long mornings at home. So I'll like just try to just do email and stay home until like more like lunchtime now, and just spend time with her and with my wife, and then go to work and deal with design work or orders or whatever I'm doing that day that has to be done. So I'm just trying to like enjoy those mornings more, just like spending that extra couple of hours at home, and it's been great.
Awesome.
It's been really great.
So how do you approach advertising these days? Are you kind of still relying on, you know, coverage by way of reaching out to folks you know, or do you work with any agencies these days, or like how are you going about that?
That's a good question. I have to say that I'm currently rethinking that whole thing. Mm-hmm. I think that the biggest challenge right now is trying to tailor your advertising to specific audiences, and make sure that it reaches them. And it's something that I'm struggling with a bit because I don't have an agency, and I feel like, and if you've like been to my website, you may have seen some of our ads, like, banner ads, whatever, on Facebook or on the web. But I definitely do not claim to be remotely an expert in this area, and I really, really need to work harder on that, because I think that's like one of the challenges that we have now, is now that there's so much noise, as we talked about before, how do you really reach people specifically with things that are relevant to them? And the basic tools of Facebook ads or Google ads, at a basic level, is not enough anymore, because then you end up just showing your ad to a lot of people that would never have been interested in the first place. So you really need to find people that can design campaigns for you to really like target. And I think, obviously this is a big discussion these days with the politics and stuff, and the ads that people are being micro-targeted.
Sure.
Those people have like probably the best people working for them. So I need to find one of those people.
Right. Yeah.
That's what I need to do. But yeah, I don't know. I do print ads too, but I do those more for fun than I don't think print ads generate sales the way that they probably did in the past, but I enjoy designing print ads and making them and putting them in some magazines, but it is kind of expensive. So
right.
I don't do a whole lot of it.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about your Ferrari?
Sure.
What's the backstory? What do you have?
So it's a Dino 208 GT4, and I bought it about 7 years ago now. It was actually on Craigslist in New Jersey, and I was actually looking for a Fiat Dino coupe at the time, as I always wanted to have that V6 Dino engine and get a Fiat Dino. So, but I would always, whenever I would search for cars, I would use like very general terms. So I just like search for Dino and just see what comes up instead of being like Fiat Dino coupe.
The Flintstones.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I searched for Dino on Craigslist in the car section, and lo and behold, this black GT4 shows up, and it was like really good price, and it was in New Jersey, and I was like, this has to be a scam. This cannot be real. There's no way this car is like available in this condition. Anyway, so I sent an email to the address expecting to hear nothing back or to have some weird spam. So I get a reply back from this guy, and he had a really weird name, which I won't repeat because for his anonymity, but he had like a very unusual name, and I thought, oh, this definitely has to be shady because this sounds like a name someone made up. And but the guy was totally real, and he was like a super nice guy, and he was an older man, and he was getting rid of stuff. And
one owner?
No, the car, I don't know how many owners it's had, to be honest, but I know that he was probably at least the second, if not the third, U.S. owner of the car, and the car was brought over sometime in the mid-'80s, and it lived in the Northeast the whole time.
And what year is the car?
76.
Got it.
I have no idea how many people owned it in Italy. I know I have the original owner's name because I have the libretto from when the car was new. Like, I have all the papers, so I know where the car was sold originally and who owned it, but I don't know anything
in between
after that. Yeah. And I don't know what the license plate number was, I don't think. I should look and see, but anyway. But yeah, so the car was here. It had a rebuilt engine, so I was like, great, because that was my biggest fear, was that I didn't have a lot of money at the time. This was like a real stretch to buy this car, but I wanted, like, business was starting to do well, and I just wanted to get something cool. And I remember having this long email exchange with my car blog friends, being like, can you believe this is real? Like, should I do it? Should I even go see it? Like, what if it's fake? And they were like, no, just go see it. So I went, and it was real. So, and the guy was really nice, and he said, well, you're the first person that came here in person. You have first right of refusal. Don't rush. Like, take a few days, think about it.
Did you do any like pre-purchase inspection or anything like that?
I did have a mechanic at the time who came to get it with me, but that was after I'd already agreed to buy it. And I basically bought it based on my own inspection of the car, which is more, I'm not like a mechanic or anything, but I know what to look for, at least as far as rust and other stuff like that. And like I brought a magnet and I went underneath way underneath it on my back. And I felt like it was reasonably sound. It didn't have any rust. And I had all the receipts. The guy had all the receipts for all the work that had been done. I said, well, this engine was rebuilt like 4,000 miles ago, so the engine's got to be okay. Like, it's not going to blow up tomorrow.
Right.
So like I knew that like the fundamentals of the car was totally fine.
Amazing.
And so I had when the mechanic came with the trailer, he worked on it for a few months, and he did all the belts, he did all the rubber stuff, the brakes, we went through the whole car. Sure. But it was just, wear items that were needing replacement. And it did have an initial terrible electronic glitch with the ignition system. Oh. So it ran really poorly at first, but then we put in electronic ignition and it was fine.
Awesome.
And so it's been more and more reliable every year that I've owned it.
Really? That's awesome. Now, is that your weekend warrior kind of thing? Or are you going up to Lime Rock with that too?
No, I haven't. I've driven it up to Lime Rock, but I haven't driven it on the track with that car. The V8 Ferraris, the mid-engine transverse engine Ferraris, you have to be a bit careful because there's an oil starvation issue that can happen in like a long corner. And it can really mess up the engine. So unless you really prepare the car for track use, it's not like a great idea to go like motoring around at high speed on a track in one of those cars without preparing it for that. So no, I just drive it on the road, and I drive it on back roads. And my friend and I did a 1,000-mile rally in North Carolina.
Oh, sweet.
In that car.
Where'd you guys
go? We went to Tail of the Dragon as well.
Oh, I've never done it.
It's a rally called the Mountain Melee.
Yeah.
It starts at the Greenbrier, which is in West Virginia.
Yep.
In Sulphur Springs.
Yep.
And you drive around North Carolina, Tennessee, West Virginia, and you guys have the best roads down there. The roads are like incredible in North Carolina, and that whole region, the Blue Ridge Mountains area.
Well, and it's just beautiful.
It is, but like the pavement's great. Like the other drivers are courteous, and they like let you by.
Southern.
It's so great. No, and seriously, I think it's the best place in the whole country to drive.
Don't say that.
I know.
Like, what's wrong with you?
And I only got pulled over once. Right. So.
So what time of the year did you go?
This is in the fall.
Oh, the best.
Yeah. And we did like this road called the Diamondback, the Back of the Dragon. There's all these named, the Moonshiner. There's like all these named roads that are all the motorcyclists know the roads, but man, just incredible. They just go on and on. And,
that's awesome.
Again, the pavement's really good too, so you don't have like northeastern potholes.
Right. Or Southern California potholes.
Are there lots of potholes in Southern California?
in the greater, like obviously in the cities and stuff like that. The roads throughout LA are just, you need an SUV. Like,
oh, is that right? Wow.
You don't, but you do. Matt Farah says that his Safari 911 is perfect for Los Angeles, if that's any indication.
Okay.
But I would love to get a car and do the Tail of the Dragon. I've never done it.
Oh, you should do that.
Yeah.
It's, there's a lot of things in the automotive world that are overrated or that have been talked about so much that they can't possibly live up to it. But honestly, a clear run through that road is nirvana. It is so good, that road. Like, all the cambers and the corners are so deep. You get incredible grip, like in these cambered corners. and it's literally like the car is like on rails, and you can really just have explosive acceleration out of the corner because the car is so hunkered down that you're not going to just like lose the rear end. So you can really like confidently just drive really fast through that road. Although it's so twisty that you never really get up to that high of a speed either.
Right.
So it's not.
There's like over 100 turns.
Yeah, I think it's over 200 turns.
Oh, it could be. Yeah, I knew it was astronomical.
In 11 miles. I have like a magnet somewhere from the gift shop that says like 273 corners in 11 miles or something.
Oh,
I don't know.
cool.
But it's it's like you can't go there. If you go there at the wrong time, it's going to be full of bikers. Sure. And I don't mean like sport bikers. I mean like people on Harleys driving at low speed, like kind of cruising along. So you want to go like early in the morning, and if you can go on a weekday, it's better. And but like I say, a clean run through there, it's amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing. And there are other great roads, like I say, that are right nearby that are also not as crowded.
So what other cars are in your garage?
So I have also a Renault Alpine A110. And that car I would love to take on Tail of the Dragon someday, because that would be like the perfect car to do that road in. But that car is an amazing back road car. And that mine is a 65, so it's a fairly early car. And then I have a 59 Alpha Giulietta Spider, which is prepared as a race car. So that car is road legal, and it has all the lights and everything on it, and the horn and all that stuff. So I drive it to the track, and then I run it and drive it home. And it's been great because I'm a very nostalgic person. I love the past, and I love racing history and so on. And being able to drive that car to the track and race it is like, to me, it's like living history. It's being able to like kind of put myself in that time period and in a small way. And I just love using that car and driving it.
Sure. What if any, are there any watches other than Autodromo that you own and or wear?
Well, I don't really wear any other watches anymore, because the one day I wear like a vintage Heuer is like the day I run into someone that wants to see one of my watches, and I'm like, I didn't wear one today. So I basically stopped wearing other watches. I just have a couple of things, like nothing that amazing, honestly. I have a Heuer Monza and a Heuer Pasadena, and then I have a couple other weird, eccentric little things. Like, but I wasn't like a watch collector before I started this. I bought a couple of watches to learn about watches, but I really came at this from a car angle. And I had to learn about watches. But, I guess for some people who are diehard watch people, they might be like, oh my God, like he's not a watch collector, blah, blah, blah. But you have to understand that being a product designer, I have consistently had to learn a ton about anything I was designing. I've designed medical equipment. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a surgeon, but I can design something that a surgeon would use. And it's all a matter of studying and learning. And so with watches, it's no different, that I had to learn about how they're made, about how movements work, what movements are good and which ones are not good, which ones are relevant to what I'm making and which ones are stuff that I don't need to make a GMT, for example. Like, it's not really automotive related, but that's a cool movement if you're making other types of watches.
Well, you've got something pretty cool on your wrist right now.
Yeah, so this is the Group B Safari, and it's the latest colorway version of the Group B series, and it's entirely green. So it has a green, and it's a stainless steel bracelet, but it's been plated with a green colored plating, and the dial is also green, and it has a little 80s style Safari logo on it. And it has a natural lume for the indexes. So if you picture that, it's a Group B with like natural lume and then just all green. And I just thought it would be cool to do a watch that was completely monochromatic, all green. don't ask me why. It just felt like that it would just be a really cool looking thing. I didn't want it to be like a military watch, but so it's not really olive green. It's almost like an emerald green color. It has a slight iridescence to it.
Yeah. And then, so how do you coat it? Is it DLC?
This is a plate. It's a ion plating.
Oh, interesting.
For the green, because DLC you can't do this color.
I was gonna say I thought it would be sort of inhibited by color.
Yeah. There's a real limit to the number of colors you can do, and ion plating is one of the only ways that you can color stainless steel like in colors other than like black or gray. Right. So they can do certain colors, and this green, of the colors that were available, like I told them I wanted green, and they sent me some chips, and like this was like the coolest green that they could do. So I really, really like it. And,
yeah, it looks really good.
And we did a special edition box for it as well. That's all green as well. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Do you have like I've asked other car guys their dream garage, but you can only get 3 cars.
Ooh.
What are you putting in your dream garage?
And money's no object?
Money's no object.
Oh, man. 3 cars. I would say Alpha 2.9, AC 2900 would be one. I think a Maserati A6 GCS coupe would be, or maybe the Roadster. I don't know. The Barchetta is pretty epic, I have to say, but that would be like a pretty amazing 50s car to have. And then the third one, I mean, the easy thing to say would be the Ferrari GTO, but
the 288?
No, the 250 GTO.
Oh. I don't know why I just went to.
Well, because you're probably thinking, well, he's got a pre-war car, a 50s car, so then the next one should be like a supercar. It would be cool to have a McLaren F1, but I honestly, sure. I like old stuff. So, although McLaren F1 is now old, but I think either a short wheelbase Ferrari or a Tour de France. I can't decide between the two, but
the TDFs are gorgeous.
Yeah. The TDF for me is a more beautiful design, but it's longer and a little more ponderous, and the short wheelbase is more modern and it's really perfectly proportioned. But somehow, maybe it's just because you see pictures of them so often, I feel like somehow the TDF now feels more special to me.
Like a sleeper.
Yeah, weirdly. It's like there's too many, it's like you see the SWB too much, but I used to think hands down that the SWB was the most beautiful Ferrari ever designed. And now I'm like starting to appreciate the TDF a bit more, just because there's a lot of more variations of the TDF. It's way less of a production car. There's like different generations of it and they all look a bit different. So
not to be confused with the F12 TDF.
Not to be confused with that. But I do like those a lot. And, for the A6 GCS also, I just love. Actually, what other car I really, really love? There's a particular Zagato-bodied Ferrari 250 that is just jaw-droppingly beautiful. And it's actually one of the basis for the box of the Interopa. The color scheme is taken from that car because it's a blue car with a white roof, and the interior is like a teal blue, and the box is white and blue with a teal interior, and it's based on that specific car, it's just such a gorgeous car.
Speaking of Easter eggs, that's cool.
Yeah. That's a really, really stunning car, and I love those cars because they weren't just beautiful, they were also high-performance cars that people actually raced. So you might see these cars at like Pebble Beach now, but that car, the specific car I'm talking about, was in the Coppa Interopa, which is what the watch is named after. Like that car was raced by a gentleman racer when it was new. And I just love the intersection of like coach-built car that also has high performance, and can be driven anywhere, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I just love the idea, frankly, of just driving to the track, driving on the track, and then driving home.
Yeah,
I just think
it's an awesome thing.
Yeah.
And I love the idea that, you can picture these guys like driving to this beautiful hotel after the race, and they're like, the car's all like covered in crap, and the numbers are still on the side, and they just pull up there in this gorgeous, Zagato bodied Ferrari, and go to dinner and like have a great time with their friends. And then the next day they, go back home or whatever. And I just think that kind of beautiful life is sort of the fantasy, that's the world that I wish I could live in if I could go back in time.
Oh man. So, well, you and me both.
Yeah. I know. That was an amazing time. If you had those privileges and so on, but that would have been an amazing time period to live in and to experience as a car lover.
Sure. Well, Bradley, this has been super fun, man. I really appreciate you dedicating the time.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you for dedicating the time to come up here and meet me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. See ya.
Okay.
Big thanks goes out to Bradley one more time for having me in the office. It was a fun little getaway to get outside of New York City. And of course, I really appreciate the time, and thank you so much for racing me back to the train. As always, big shout out to Clear Audio for the headphones, as well as to Jensen Reed and Super Beautiful for the theme track. Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope everyone's doing well. Please stay tuned for another episode in 2 weeks' time. Take care of yourselves and each other.